Welcome back to Life During Wartime. This is yours truly, the Wolfman, speaking. Tonight I'm here with Tony Barber to discuss the history of his involvement with the band Lack of Knowledge, who formed in Edmonton, which is located in northeast London, during the year of 1980, comprised of Tony, Paul Stevens, Jason Powell, and Daniel Drummond. In a few years prior, Drummond had been a part of the now obscured group Headache, who in the late 1970s released the single Can't Stand Still on Loud Records. More on that later. Fast forward, Lack of Knowledge would self-release their first single, The Uninvited, with Ritual, which would garner the interest of Penny Rimbaud and eventually lead to the follow-up release of the record Grey on Crass Records in 1983. And then, contrary to expectations, things began to sort of happen, so to speak, for Lack of Knowledge. Following two more releases, Sirens Are Back and Sentinels, Lack of Knowledge would dissolve after a final gig in Colchester, which is now being contested in our argument or our conversation earlier. But this was in August of 1986. I was wanted to ask about Headache real quick. A little side note in a previous interview I had read where that when Can't Stand Still came out, that it was like way overpressed, and that they ended up melting down a lot of those records like within a few months after that, because it could be found in like every dollar store bin in England at the time. I mean, is this true?
Well, that's what Dan told me years ago.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's true. But yeah, at one point in the 80s, it was pretty much in the second hand or the bargain 7-inch bin of most record stores I would go in. But it wouldn't be a used copy. It'd be a new, there'd be 3 new copies sitting in the, in the 10p box, as we would have called it back then.
Yeah.
But I think that overpress. I mean, I don't know if there was any more records on that label. I think it was just that one.
Yeah, no, that was pretty much it. Now, once all that had passed, how did things go with Daniel when you began rehearsing together as Lack of Knowledge? When did all of that start to transpire?
Well, Danny's brother Bernard was the main catalyst for Lack of Knowledge performing. He was 2 years older than me, and Paul's 2 years younger. And me and Paul kind of became friends through his brother, who was in my class at school. And in '77, we sort of started, going record shopping together and stuff. And then I bought a guitar and he bought a bass, both from Woolworths. And one day, Paul said to me, "We've got to go around this guy Bernard's house. He's a mate of my older brother, the brother who's even older than me." And so we went around, he had a drum kit in his bedroom, and we started rehearsing as a 3-piece instrumental group. This would have been around early 78, maybe April 78.
Yeah, you said 79 because people had made comparisons to Joy Division, of course, more commonly, but you had said that Joy Division only put out one single at that time, so there weren't any correlations to that.
When Lack of Knowledge started rehearsing, me, Paul, and Bernard, the very first lineup and rehearsals we had, we were at that time influenced by, we wanted to sound. Well, I say influenced by. We could play. We wanted to sound like Magazine, Susie the Banshees, and Wire. They were the 3 groups that we liked sound. And then get towards the end of '78, we were just rehearsing his bedroom. We would just record all the rehearsals. They were all kind of funny instrumentals with a stupid twee in anemic sort of guitar lick that sounded like Boredom by the Buzzcocks, that kind of thing, sort of angular. It wasn't fast punk or anything like that. It was much more like something from Pink Flag played badly.
Okay.
And in early '79, Paul, what actually happened was Paul went off and auditioned to join the Fatal Microbes as their bass player. They had a bass player wanted sign up in the notice board of Small Wonder. Paul went down because we were fans of the Fatal Microbes, and he went down to play with them, and he got it. And so that just left me and Bernard. And Bernard then went and joined this kind of power pop group called The Position.
Okay.
Paul then went to another rehearsal and then decided he didn't like it, didn't want to do it. I mean, he was 13, It's like, so by this time now we didn't have a drummer, and then The Position, the group that Bernard joined, decided they needed an extra guitarist, so I joined them, which left Paul on his own.
All right.
I got booted out, and it was me and Paul again. And Danny then was not in a band and came back to live at his mum's. And one day he just said to us, I'll be your singer. I haven't got a band, which to us was insane because, you know, Dan had played the Roxy and the Vortex and had a record out, you know, and he was older than us. It was like Roger Daltrey had asked to join our band. You
So
know,
he was a huge influence to you all at the time.
it was, yeah. You know, Danny was. I mean, Byrne was bad enough. You know, as being the sort of kind of. I won't say the alpha male because it wasn't like that at all. But you know, Pete Bernard was very, very sort of influential to me and Paul. You know, he didn't want to just sound like Slaughtering the Dogs or Eater. You know, he wanted us to be a group that had their own sound. You know, and what happened was later on in '78, when things like the first Scritti Politti single came out and Bingo Master's Breakout, well, it was actually before that. It was the Electric Circus Short Circuit album where we first got to hear The Fall.
Okay.
He immediately started doing a cover version of the track on there called Last Orders. We may be the first band to ever cover The Fall. I'm going to claim that. And I have cassette evidence of it as well.
All right.
And that would have been around about October '78. And then, you know, Factory Sample with Joy Division on it was followed up with Feeding the 5,000, which we liked all of that stuff. And then by that time we didn't have Bernard, so it was me, Paul, and Danny. We sort of fucked around really for about the next 8 or 9 months.
Elaborate on fucked around. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, you know, me and Paul going off to try to do the Fatal Microbes, Bert joining the position, me joining the position, me getting fired from the position after our one recording session with the guy that produced Ghost Town by the Specials, it was actually called Front Room Studios in Tottenham. The guy that produced.
All right.
And it wasn't enough, actually recorded the drums in the guy's front room and all the guitars had to be recorded and then done again in his kitchen. And there's a theme to this, which I'll elaborate on. But so yeah, after we did that recording session, I got booted out the position on the weekend before we were going to do their first gig with me on guitar, and it was going to be opening for Prague-Vec and this group called The Light, which had a guy in it called William Orbit, who appears again in the Lack of Knowledge thing later on. So after that happened, we sort of didn't have a drummer, so we sort of fucked around for a bit. And then one day, my girlfriend, Karen, there was a guy in a class, and I saw him walking to school one day in bondage trousers. Very unusual. You know, he's got his school blazer and his tie and his V-neck jumper on, you know, because it's England and we all wear school uniforms. A pair of Doc Martens and a pair of zip Clash-style bondage trousers.
The only, was it like it from like the waist down, the revolt? But you had to keep the waist up with the uniform?
No, there was no rule. I mean, you have to understand as well, you know, teenagers, what they're like, right? There is no rule that says that the regulation black trousers on your school uniform can't have zips in them. There's nothing in the rules.
All right.
That say black it just says your school uniform is the blazer, the tie with the stripes on it, the V-neck jumper, black shoes, and black trousers. Well, we had black trousers on, they just had loads of zips in them. Oh, so you know, I see this guy walking to school one day, and I just, you know, there's not many punks at this point. You know what I mean? You know, music itself was still a peripheral interest to people who wanted to pursue it or be in a band. As Danny always said to me, he goes, there was 3 guys in my school that collected American comics. Liking music was less popular than liking American comics. And that's a reality of what music was like before it became sort of kind of suburbanized later on in the 21st century.
But like at that time, I mean, was it what was available, or was the interest that genuinely diverted away from music towards other things?
No. What I refer to as square people, they didn't like music in the way that they like it now. You know, they might own 2 records, one of which would be like the Birdie song or a fucking Smurfs record, you know, and then the other one would be someone's greatest hits, you know, fucking, Slim Whitman's great hits or the 20 Golden Greats by the Shadow. People
Oh,
never bought records. That's why when people don't understand, the Clash in their entire career, I don't know if they ever had a record in the top 20. You know what I mean? They were the biggest band in Britain in rock music. You couldn't keep them off the front page of the music papers. But in mainstream society, it meant nothing. People didn't know who Led Zeppelin were. You could go up to anyone in the street and go Led Zeppelin and go, never heard of them. Or if they did go,
yeah.
people can't understand what the world was like back then. They really genuinely have got no idea of what the world was like back then. Liking music didn't mean you had fucking Spotify or even that. You got to understand as well, music, there was no such thing as music on adverts. There was no such thing as music in the background in a Hollywood movie. There was no such thing as music in the background of a cop show. Didn't exist. Miami Vice was in the 80s, was one of the first shows, would have been one of the first shows to do that. So music was this kind of peripheral thing where people had funny haircuts, straight people just dressed like your dad. They didn't walk around in like Japanese denim and fucking, some kind of fucking puffer jacket made by a North Face or whatever. Middle-aged people just looked like they were about 80. People of 35 looked 80 in fucking the 70s and 80s. You know what I mean? Just go and look at some photos of Britain in the 70s and 80s. Seriously, it's only youth cults that look different. You know what I mean?
No, it's quite antiquitous in its appeal.
And then what you're talking about is, say you lived in like a neighbourhood in North London, like I did. We are talking London. I knew every single one of the 7 punks in the entire fucking borough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what, and people that liked heavy rock, you knew them because there were 6 of them in the entire borough. You know what I mean? Someone who wore a badge, right, on any item of clothing would have been like, it would is the equivalent of outsider art. You know what I mean? It's very difficult to today explain just how weird it was owning a guitar in 1978 or whatever. Never mind about forming a group and trying to make records or what things like that, So it was a very, very weird thing. So what it consequently did would be, you would be looking for a drummer and you'd just go up to a kid you saw walking down the street who's got bondage trousers, going like, well, he's going to like roughly the same music as us, and he clearly likes music. So have you ever played drums before? No. Fancy being the drummer in our group? I guess so. And then we went and bought a drum kit out of the back of the local paper that just happened to be for sale for 50 quid. Dragged it back to this youth club that we all used to hang out in. And we negotiated for him to give us a room. We set the kit up and took our practice amps down there. And then me and Paul and Chiefy, Jason Powell, known as Chiefy to everybody, we started rehearsing with him. And bear in mind, he'd never sat on a drum kit. He didn't know which end of the stick to hold or anything.
How old were you all at the time?
I would have been 16. Chiefy was 14, I think. And Paul was 14. So what we did is we just went to the room 4 nights a week, and we just started bumbling our way through, let's get a bass line going. Let's try and drum along to it. I don't know how it all happened. It's impossible to perceive it now, what with mute rock schools and people going to university to learn to play the guitar. It just seems mad now. But yeah, within 3 months, we had actual bits of music that's had a beginning and an end and last roughly about 2.5 minutes. And we could all roughly play them in time together. And that was like, oh, so now we got Danny back, because now it was like we've got all the 4 of us. And so then that's really when Lack of Knowledge started as that real band, was about the beginning of 1980 or the summer of 1980. I can't remember now. And then we started writing songs, and it sort of moved quite quickly then. We wrote songs every time we rehearsed. We had a new song. Danny was prolific with lyrics. Me and Paul would always have an idea for a bit of music, a riff or whatever, And then we hadn't even played a gig when we recorded The Uninvited. It was the first thing we did. We went and recorded The Uninvited at a studio down in South
That's what I was going to ask.
side of London.
You recorded it in like a single evening at what? It was at Octave Electronics back in '81. So it was like 41 years ago now.
That was, the version that's on the single was the second time we recorded it. What actually happened is we went down to a studio in right over the other side of southeast London, and it was a studio where I've later found out Bauhaus had recorded their second recording session after the Bela Lugosi. They went down and did it there, and I think like the business had been done some demos there. But it just looked good in the paper. It looked cheap, you know. We went and recorded Uninvited and 3 other tracks. And when we got back, we listened to them and didn't like them. I think Danny had a cold, you know, and didn't like his vocals. So then we fluked upon this studio within a mile of our house in a front room of in a fucking house in the front room. And we just went there in the week, recorded it one evening. You know, you couldn't get there, but you couldn't record until, I don't know, something had happened, like he'd been doing something else in the daytime. And we went and recorded like the Uninvited and what was going to be the B-side, and then did it all in like this. I think 2, one to record, one to mix. Then we didn't like the B-side, and then we went back and recorded Ritual one evening, recorded and mixed in 3 hours. That was the single. And then we'd done our first gig not long after.
No, what's significant about Uninvited and Ritual though is that they're a world apart from each other musically. Like Ritual's almost kind of got this. I could compare it to something like a Mega Tribe, maybe, that sort of upbeat pacing to it, and then Uninvited is very much almost more substantially unique to Lack of Knowledge sound, which kind of develops later. When you wrote the material and put that together, was there any intention to kind of to have these 2 songs deviate from one another, or you just kind of went with it and what came out came out?
We always joke about it because Ritual was the newest song we'd written. And again, don't put your best song on there, just put the newest one on there. We laugh about it now, me and Danny, you know what I mean? The absurdity of it. But, you know, that's what that record is, you know what I mean? When it got reviewed, people said that Ritual sounded like Killing Joke.
Killing Joke. Well, I guess I could see it more in the time and place. I could see it now. I'm thinking of Killing Joke in the totality of their career here. So I'm sorry.
No. I mean, 1980 when Ritual was recorded, Killing Joke only had the first album out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Maybe 3 singles. So it's not like you can't listen to it and go, yeah, it does sound like Love Like Blood.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, in the early days with Lack of Knowledge, the group would organize their own gigs at places like the Corindon. Now, is this? I'm gonna butcher the name of this. Is it called the Centro? What is that place? Iberico? What is
Iberico?
No, yeah, Centro Iberico. And then there was, of course, the infamous Zigzag Club. And these are just a few of the various places that are active at the time. Now, revisiting this, what is substantial? I know that you would like certain venues, you could just go write your name in and you could kind of have the date, and then from there you organized everything around it. But in various interviews over the years, you've mentioned collaborating with different bands and different people in the community to be able to put these gigs on, and also talk about, like in The Day the Country Died with the Glasper, you all talk about how much more fulfilling these early gigs were because of this sort of effort that you had to put into to get them organized and the turnout they would play as a result.
Well, it's funny because at least I'm consistent. They are those. I think that the longer Lack of Knowledge went on, the more we started playing. Not because we made a conscious effort to do it. We started playing rock clubs like the Clarendon and places like this, right? And the Fulham Greyhound, which admittedly the Fulham Greyhound is a pub with a huge fucking room at the side, and everyone would play there. Flux, the Subhumans, Amiga Tribe and all that, Brugella Ballet. We'd be playing with all those bands.
Yeah,
and it wasn't like a venue where, I'm trying to think of some mainstream stuff from the day. But what I preferred was the ones where I would go out and find a church hall somewhere, say to the guy, do you mind if I rent this place? Can I put a gig on? Yes. And then, I'd phone up the other bands that we knew, Dirt, whoever, before that they even had a record out. Crass, I think we knew them because they were from Edmonton originally. And then we'd put the gig on ourselves, and we'd organise the little vocal PA. We'd go to the supermarket and buy some cases of beer to sell on the way in, because there was also other weird restrictions, like you weren't allowed to sell beer, but what you could do is you could win beer in a raffle. So what you did is you charged like 50p or a quid to get into the gig, and when you paid to get in, you got given a raffle ticket, and guess what? Now you're allowed to buy a beer for 50p.
All right.
You have to do all these kind of weird things. But of course, the gig itself, the way to publicise it was by photocopying a flyer that you'd made with Letraset and cut a picture out of the fucking magazine and go and stick them up on the bus stops all around the local area, or whatever. I preferred those gigs because it fitted more in what we wanted to do, and to now when I look back on it, it's more really like who we were. Like I always say, I go, we're a sort of accidental group. We didn't just have no ambitions to be as big as U2. We didn't even have ambitions to be as big as, I don't know, fucking Drones or something. You know what I mean? We didn't even realise we were doing what we were doing. And so I sort of look at it now and go, that was really the best things that we did were when we were doing those kind of gigs, because they were more relevant to who we were and the kind of band we were. And it's more representative of how we saw ourselves. You know what I mean? We never saw ourselves as even a national band, never mind about a global band. Or, the idea of us having a record deal just seems, no. You must have phoned the wrong guys. It would be like that to us. But how that evolved, you would do gigs in your own area, and then we started we're not blagging, but I remember we did this one time in maybe early 81, middle of 81. We played this gig in a squat in a church, and that was the first time we met people like Conflict or Rubella Ballet, even though we'd been to see and play live. And so I think we did a couple of gigs in our area where, Zounds come and played one time. The Erratics were local to us as well, so we'd play shows with the Erratics. We got friendly with the Apostles. Then we got friendly with the Omega Tribe. And then, we would hang out together when we weren't gigging and go drinking.
What about, you mentioned developing, for instance, with other groups. What about Anthrax? I know you've mentioned in previous interviews, you've talked about having a particularly personal relationship with Anthrax.
Yeah, Anthrax, they were funny because they were from, the interesting thing about that kind of anarcho scene is in the very early days, me and Chris Lowe from the Apostles talk about it all the time, and there's a distinct difference between the very early days of what became the anarcho scene, when you had bands like Flak, the Assassins of Hope, the Apostles, Anthrax, all kind of bands that played at either the Autonomy Centre or were kind of playing these, early kind of squat gigs in like 80 and 81. And the bands had a much more of a diverse sound. And later on, as it developed, the groups kind of started now more moving towards a similar sound. And I love that early scene, like I say, we probably became friendly with your Anthrax sometime in late 81. And then we played with Dirt when Dirt recorded their album at Stepney at the whatever that place was called, the Half Moon Theatre, Stepney. And then we sort of played a few gigs with Anthrax. They were really nice guys. We got on great with them, and we liked their music, and I think they sort of liked us as well. But it was weird because the Omega Tribe was the similar thing. They didn't really at the beginning have a sound, especially when Pete Fender joined them. They had a much more, you could hear a Beatle influence in what they did.
Yeah.
They had backing vocal harmonies for a fucking start, which was, Jesus Christ, I'm surprised they didn't get excommunicated for that. Never mind the guitar solos. But and so that kind of weird diversity of all the groups, and groups didn't necessarily, sort of groups like even Cold War, which I liked, Anthrax and Assassins of Open. Oh, I can't even remember. There were so many great bands who have sort of, I won't say they've been written out. That's not fair. You know what I mean? But they've been definitely somehow, they've become less important in the big picture of the anarcho scene in London and the surrounding areas, because not all the groups were from London. Omega Tribe were from Barnet, which seemed out in the wilds at the time. Even we seemed out in the wilds. Edmonton. People going, where the fuck's Edmonton? We're going, it's right next door to Tottenham. I'd never heard of it.
You know, that's true. I've driven around England, and everyone in England is like, man, everything is far away. And I'm like, everything is 3 hours away. We can go anywhere here.
Yeah, now when I tell people, you know, you can support the New York Yankees and live 8 hours away in New York.
Yeah.
People don't, they just can't get their heads around it, you know. But yeah, so we sort of became friendly, not in a, you know, I don't think we were all going to each other's birthday parties, if anybody bother having one. But you know, funnily enough, down here somewhere, I've got, I didn't have it out for this interview, but I have, you know, all my little address books and diaries going back years. That one's from 1984. The pages are full.
Oh shit!
I'd see stuff like, oh, there you go. I'm doing a gig on the 4th of July at Chislehurst Caves, playing guitar for Rebella Ballet. It's got all. It has it all. It doesn't have people's birthdays. It just has what day I was rehearsing with groups and stuff. But you know, when I pull out my address books from that time, you know, all the people in it are all the guys from those bands, you know, and we would phone each other up and we'd arrange a gig in their neighbourhood, and then they'd come down and play in our neighbourhood. So, you know, it was a great thing, and I miss that part of music. And you know, later on, as I did things after Lack of Knowledge, which was much more in the mainstream of music, regular clubs, record labels, it's kind of boring, you know what I mean, really. You know, I liked it, don't get me wrong, I fucking love music, I love rock music, I love playing guitar, I love everything to music, you know, but there's something way more, not just satisfying, but it does feel,
it's a little more organic. Typically, it's got like an organic component to it.
It fits who I am better. Do you know what I mean? Like, I know, like, you'd imagine everybody'd go, yeah, what's there not to like about organising your own gigs in a church hall and doing that? A lot of people couldn't handle it, to be honest. Most people can't tie their own shoelaces. You know? But to me, I liked it better. I don't know if it's just because I like things when they're much more smaller. You know what I mean?
Well, not to deviate too much into the exterior of your career, because you've done so many other things, but how do you feel like maybe when you went to the next level with some of these things, as far as like you know, within the music industry, do you think that maybe there was some more curiosity because of the years of the DIY endeavor, that you were kind of curious of, you know, it led to you wanting to know more about how this stuff was working?
I don't know. I think that there might be, you know, I don't want to talk about,
just out of being hobbyist. I mean, not like with any incentive, so to speak.
I think you're on the right tracks, but I also think what it might have been was that when I was young, you know, before punk rock, wanted to form a group after punk rock, you know, I liked Mark Bolan. I never really liked David Bowie. People go nuts saying that. I do, of course, grew to like him, but
well, you just said you were a Mark Bolan fan in Portland. The whole city melted. They're like, they respect you more now.
Mark Bolan was the reason why I thought it'd be great to, you know, rock music, brilliant. You know, I loved glam rock, but it was Mark Bolan, it was Metal Guru on top of the pops that started it. So I think what happened is after Lack of Knowledge, when I played in other bands, and now, you know, I'm in a band that's got a real record deal, and I'm playing gigs, I'm getting on aeroplanes. I didn't get on an airplane until I was 25. Never stayed in an hotel till I joined the band, and I was 25 or something. I've never been in an hotel. And I think part of it might have been that I never got carried away, don't get me wrong, but how I would have put up with it, probably can't think of a better definition, how I would have put up with all the kind of, not drudgery, but, you know, it's definitely not as interesting as doing the DIY stuff. I would have thought, well, if this is what I do to be like Mark Bolan, you know, and be a musician, I wake up in the morning and I'm a guitarist in a band, then that was enough for me, because I thought, not that I'm scared of work or don't like working. You know, I love working in an office. I love working in a factory. It's great. You know what I mean? But what's better than being a guitarist in a group? You know what I mean? Nothing. Not. I don't mean the being paid for it or getting on an airplane. I just mean you wake up and what you're going to do that day is fucking play guitar. I mean, to me, that's great. I mean,
You're doing what you want to. I mean, most people don't get to do what they want to.
Yeah, you wouldn't have said Picasso, it must be rubbish waking up in the morning knowing you're going to have to paint stuff. He'd have gone, no, that's the bit I like.
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
what
yeah.
I wanted to do. You know, and what I wanted to do in my life was play guitar. You know what I mean? And so later on, you know, I think all of those things were just connected more to do with that. As regards the satisfaction, when you organize a gig from scratch and you do it, and there's like 50 people there in a church hall, and there's 5 bands playing, and the PA is a fucking guitar amp with 2 4x12s plugged into it, and it beats back, and it's horrible. And you've stuck all of the posters up on bus stops yourself, you know, with a bucket of fucking wheat paste. To me, it's like, yeah, it might not be successful in most people's eyes, and I'll be honest, a lot of people would say, why would you bother to go to all that fucking aggro when you can just simply phone up a rock venue and go and do a gig in a rock venue, opening for another band who's going to pull 50 people on a Tuesday or whatever? I just go, yeah, it's boring. You know what I mean? To me, it was boring. I never liked it. You know, lack of knowledge. There was a sort of a weird, not depression, but there was a sort of weird, like, for me, I think not just me and Danny, but everyone in the band, it was like when we went and played one of these regulation rock venues, you know, I can't think.
Felt sterile to yourself. That's well, you've talked about it in previous interviews. You've talked about, you know, when you interviewed with Ian Glasper years ago, you talked about how it just it had this inorganic sort of feel, that it was just plastic, you know, compared.
Yeah, it just didn't. There was nothing interesting about it, and I suppose now I'm, you know, older, I can look back at it and think, well, what would it have been about the whole experience that I found deflating or whatever? And I probably now can nail it and go, well, what in reality, what you're doing is you're putting yourself in a situation where you've got to sell yourself. You're trying to sell lack of knowledge to, you know, whether it's the music industry or the crowd or whatever. And I think that's the bit that doesn't make sense, because lack of knowledge about that. We were just, like I said, some bumbling sort of teenagers, or you know, when we stopped being teenagers, but you know, guys who'd formed a group. We didn't know what we were supposed to be doing. We didn't want to know what we were supposed to be doing. I think it would have been too daunting, you know. Anyway, I don't think we weren't cut out for lack of knowledge being Duran Duran. Not because we weren't good looking enough. It would have confused us having to go
just not hungry like the wolf. No.
You know, if we had to just do some of the real obvious things that rock groups have to do, like be in a video or go and fly to Amsterdam to do a radio interview on a Tuesday morning, then fly back to do a TV performance, we'd have been laughing, thinking they'd accidentally got the wrong guys in. You know what I mean? That's what kind of how we were. We considered ourselves as contenders at all. We don't think lack of knowledge was a failure, because we never went set out to be in the race anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's no incentive, so to speak. You're just playing, but things do take off around you. Now, like let's go back now. When Lack of Knowledge would record the first self-release single, "The Uninvited," in '81, right? Following that, you know, there's kind of this drawn-out span of time here with Gray. So with the story of Gray, you know, the events preceding the actual record, there's like a year between 81, all of it, 1982, basically, before you get to 83 when you release this. Now, what happened during 1982 that would develop your relationship with Penny Rimbaud, which led to subsequent releases on Crass Records in Corpus Christi?
Well, when we got the records back from the pressing plant and then fucking sat in my mum's front room and put the records in the sleeves.
How many were originally pressed?
We originally pressed 500, and then we pressed another 500 because
that's a lot of sleeving parties right there.
Right, but here's the thing, right? Of course, I take the full responsibility for this. we pressed the 500 records, but my local printer said to me, don't print 500 sleeves, print 1,000 because it's cheaper. The unit price goes down.
Yeah.
So I printed 1,000 sleeves. So after we printed 500 records and sleeved them all up, took them to Small Wonder, Rough Trade, Bonaparte, and all the places that took records, they would play it and go, yeah, we'll take 10, Did that. And then when we'd kind of sold them all, I thought, what am I going to do with these 500 sleeves? I don't want to throw them away. So I thought, oh no, I'll just get another 500 records pressed. So I got another 500 records pressed, and of course, no one fucking bought them. So I had them for years. They were stacked up in the cupboard where I keep the vacuum cleaner in my flat, and so yeah, in total there was 1,000, but really only about 600 ever got sold.
Now, when just a side note real quick, like there's such an expediency with like even records today, like they come out and then next week something else is going on. Was it a lot of the same back then? Because you have a burst of singles on the scene in the early 1980s, and you spend a lot of time in places like Small Wonders comes up a lot. So like, do you feel like that's why you set on the second 600, or did you just sit on them because you weren't ambitious about it?
No, its time had gone. You know what I mean?
So it was the first then. Okay, I'm for you.
Yeah, it's kind of its time had gone, and then also as a band, its time had gone. We'd moved on. We had new, better songs. And that record, we thought we could improve on that record. In fact, I can tell you exactly what happened after we recorded The Uninvited, and we finally got it all together. We took the finished copies over to Dial House, and then, of course, Penn took it out the back and played it and come back and said, oh, we should do a record on our label. We went, all right, great. We then, this would have been very early 82, we went into the studio to record a follow-up to The Uninvited, which was Sentinel and another track for the B-side. We recorded it, and in classic Lack of Knowledge fashion, we didn't like it, so we shelved it. We had the sleeve was kind of pretty much finished, and the record was recorded. We didn't really like it. And then we thought we were going to be going in the studio to record Grey. So we thought, well, that don't matter because we don't need, we've recorded this other thing. We're not too keen on it. Let's not bother going re-recording it like we did with The Uninvited. Let's just now do Grey.
Yeah.
Kept getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. Eventually, we got in the studio in 83 to record it. And it never made it out until the Easter of 84. So although the record catalogue number is 1983, the record didn't actually appear until early 84. About April 84, I think.
As young as you all are, that must have felt like 4 decades. You were like, I have grown up. I'm like 2 feet taller since this was recorded.
Yeah. It did feel like that, yeah. And the funny thing is when I don't know what the word is. There's got to be some psychological word for it or whatever. But, when I put my brain back into 1982 and then I put my brain into 1984, they're two completely different places, not just because of the obvious reasons, but we're a completely different band in 82 to what we are in 84. So by the time we get asked to record Grey, we've got a definite sound and a look for that period. And by the time the record comes out, we're like completely different band. We've even virtually got a new lineup by that time.
Yeah.
We have got a new lineup. So when we got asked to do the Grey single, we were still the same lineup that recorded The Uninvited. By the time we recorded Grey, we had Philip in as a new drummer. And by the time Grey came out, Paul he was on the verge of leaving. He said, I'll stay behind and record Sirens. So you see what I mean? You're right. It did seem like a really, really long time. But everything on Crash was like that.
What was 82 though? Like, because there's a lot going on at the Zigzag Club that year. Like, you all are playing a lot of shows that year. Is it because? Do you think that because of the live performance activity, and particularly the effort that it took to put into these performances, because they're very like the aesthetic appeal that goes into them was also very vast, in the time that it took to put all of that together. Do you think that that kind of got in the way of some of the studio stuff for a while, and then after that settled down, you're like, all right, now it's time we can go record? Is that what happened there?
No, I think what the real story is that Crass were recording Christ the album
Ah, all right,
in
all
the
right.
after in the aftermath of the Falklands War, and I, obviously being around and involved in that world, Christ the album was a record that took probably. I mean, I don't think there's probably going to be much discussion. It's probably the record that out of everything on the Crass label, including all the Crass stuff, took the longest to record. I remember it constantly being reworked on, and just when it was about to be finished, they went back in and did more work on it. They would be remixing tracks and stuff like that. It was a very elaborate.
Yeah, because there's like the film that's kind of a component of all of that as well.
And of course, there's the book and it's in a box and all this. So, and then on top of that, 1982, they've probably overreached in the amount of bands they want to put singles out of. But Lack of Knowledge is probably at the back of a queue of about 5 or 6 bands that are about to record singles on Crass. And so between Christ the album being constantly worked on and revised, and all these remixes and different things being added to it and taken away, they're trying to fit, the alternative and whoever else. Oh yeah, I can't
Well,
even
they're
remember.
endless names. I mean, we could go, but I understand.
Conflict and whoever else. They're trying to fit those bands in there, and we're just a band at the end of a queue of bands that have been said, do a single on Crass. So by the time we did get around to recording it, that's just how long it took. As regards the gigs, yeah, I mean, it does seem funny now that we never played more gigs with Crass, but I think, again, it's because in 82, Crass spent so long in the studio working on Christ the album, they didn't play a lot of gigs. They asked us to do the Zigzag with them. Originally, it was going to be at the Rainbow Theatre in London, which had been closed down for a while, and they got in there to squat it, but then they got booted out, I think, a couple of days before the Zigzag, and it changed literally overnight, a couple of days before the gig.
This was a common occurrence back then, though, from what I've read, though, like band lineup changes and everything.
Yeah, and the Zigzag Club was an actual bona fide club that was, well, not built, it was an old cinema, bingo hall, whatever. Zigzag magazine, which was one of the best music magazines in Britain through the 70s, early 80s. Zigzag had decided to have their own club. So Zigzag magazine started that club. It only ran for about 6 months, and then it was closed for 2 or 3 months. And that's why Crass managed to get in there, because it still had the stage. Even when the people got in there, I think Andy Palmer was one of them, they got in there and, to open it up as a squat and organise it all for that night. There was still beer behind the bar and in the cellar that was still in place.
It had literally just been abandoned then.
So on the night of the gig, people, they dragged all of the beer out from the cellar and give it all away free, But we only played that one gig with Crass, which seems weird now, considering the connection. But again, I think it's because we weren't ambitious as people. We weren't like, oh, we're friends with this Crass group. They're big. Why don't we try and become more friendly with them?
Yeah, I understand.
Kind of weird scheming and conniving for your own personal ends. We weren't like that. If Crass said, "Do you want to play with us at Zigzag Club?" We were like, "Yeah."
Yeah. I understand.
Like a bunch of kids, and that's how we were. We didn't think for one second we could have played more gigs with Crass if we'd have been more forward about it and said, "Got any gigs coming up? Can we play with you?" We definitely want to play more shows. We weren't like that. We didn't ever think that that's what you should do. I mean, it occurs.
Well, yeah, I mean, you've talked about collaborating. I mean, you were playing with so many other bands at the time. I mean, there was so much going on outside of Crass, even at that time, with a lot of other gigs.
Yeah, I mean, later on, around the time when, in fact, it was when Grey came out, I ended up playing guitar for about 8 months, 7 or 8 months with Rubella Ballet. They were short of a guitarist, so I joined them for a bit. It did quite a few gigs with them. Did a TV show with them. Did a live. There's a live VHS video came out which I was on. Did that, and then just around the time when Sirens came out, I ended up playing guitar again for about 6 or 7 months with this band called Living in Texas. But again, that kind of rolled on into after Lack of Knowledge. But yeah, I didn't mind playing with other people if if it was worth doing, and if it seemed like the right thing to do. I mean, I was probably flattered as well because I saw Rubella, who had the connection to the Fatal Microbes. So again, one of those weird twists. Fatal Microbes and Poison Girls single came out on Small Wonder, which me and Paul bought. Paul auditioned and got the job with the Fatal Microbes. I saw Crass and Poison Girls became friendly with him, and then later on, the Rubella Ballet at that point when I started seeing him play live was Pete Fender and his sister Gemma, who were half of the Fatal Microbes.
Yeah.
So when I asked to replace Dan, Pete Fender in the Fatal Microbes in Rubella Ballet, I was like, yeah, of course. Why wouldn't I want to play guitar in a group that I love? You know what I mean? So it was great, and I got to rehearse in the Poison Girls.
Let's say Rubella Ballet has kind of a family legacy thing going on there.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, and also the Poison Girls being their mum and all that. And Rubella Ballet used to rehearse in Pete Fender's studio in the basement of the house, the Poison Girls' house in Leytonstone. So it was all kind of part of the scene. You know what I mean? It wasn't like I'd gone off and joined some mainstream band. It was just, and of course it was very, very flattering to be asked.
Oh, it's very similar. I mean, in Portland is very much a kind of incestuous city with musicians who do a lot of the same. So I understand what you mean. Now going back to, all right, so once you get to Sirens Are Back, or even let's start at Gray. So once you get to Gray, the first time you're in Southern Studios here, I know you talk about the transition a little bit in previous interviews, but let's discuss more of what your working relationship was like at the time with like John Loder. John's the one you worked with on Gray, and then later you worked with Mel Jefferson on Sirens Are Back, and Sentinel we'll talk about at the end of that. But what was your working relationship like with them when you first went to Southern, especially as you got older?
Well, when we went to Southern to record Gray, not only were we respectful is probably the only word I can think of. We were like, going in there, Penny Rimbaud, the drummer of Crass is going to be producing it. We're going to be in Southern Studios where all the Crass records are recorded, and Feeding of the 5000's done there. And John Loder is the guy that owns the studio. And, so we're in there like, yes, of course. Yes. Yes. It was like that, like they were like our schoolmasters, teachers or whatever, So, we just, we're going to do whatever they say because they know what they're fucking doing, and we didn't. We were bloody idiots. But yeah, it was great. And, we were just fucking, excited to be recording in the studio, that even though it was in the front room of a house, it seemed like a real studio. It was a 24-track, 2-inch machine with a big rain dirt desk, huge tannoy monitors and stuff, So it was great. And Penny and John made the record. They recorded us and then they made the record, you know what I mean? Like Penn added the keyboards, which was this guy, Paul Ellis, who was the keyboard player of this famous pop group in England called Hot Chocolate.
All right.
And Paul Ellis played all the keyboards on things like Yes Sir, on Christ the Album.
All right.
The keyboards and things on, he did all the keys on that. So that was great. So we was excited. I was secretly excited because he was from Hot Chocolate as well. And also it was like a funny thing. All the guys in the bands were all at my age. So we were all like, it's the guy from Hot Chocolate.
Really surrealistic kind of thing. You're like fanboying over it. Yeah.
So it was, that was kind of a sort of experience where we felt like, we go in the studio, we do what they say, we're going to do it like this, we're going to do it like that. So when he said, this is how the guitar needs to sound. That's it. I'll just let them do it. They know what they're doing. And of course, then when we meant to make Sirens, we didn't get John or Penn. We got to make the record just with us as the producers. Probably not a great idea. So Mel was the engineer, and Mel was great. I really like Mel.
You've been in touch recently, you said.
Yeah, and I've recently been in touch with him. He's a really lovely bloke, and he got an hard time from us, only in a jokey way, because he would refer to bits of the song and say, "Let's go back, and I'll tell you, I'll drop you in just before the middle eight," and we're, sort of idealistic buffoons, going, "No, it's not a middle eight. It's just a bit of the song. Who do you think we are, Duran Duran?" And he would refer to bits of the songs as like, the bridge or the middle eight, and we'd be going, "It's not a fucking middle eight, who do you think we are, Bon Jovi or something?" Whatever the groups at the time would have been, we would have been saying, "We're nothing to do with that."
I have read that you were very contrarian to like formal song structures, so to speak. Like, fuck the chorus. Like, we don't do there's no chorus.
Yeah, well, no, it wasn't. In reality, what it was is we didn't know how to write one.
All right. It's out the bag now then.
So it's some kind of defense mechanism, so that if anyone ever asked, we'd say that, "No, we don't have crosses. We don't want them." Not we couldn't write our way out of a wet paper bag,
Yeah.
And we used to wind Mel up, but we were just that's the sort of blokes we were, we kids that we were. We would do, everything was a laugh, I mean, like in most teenagers, you haven't, you're just fucking around most of the time, we wasn't applying ourselves. And we were meant to be the fucking producers. All we were doing was arguing with our engineer, who knew better than us anyway. And we were just arguing with him, telling him, "No, that's not a middle eight, you're wrong, and we want to do it like this." And anyway, so we made Sirens entirely on our own with Mel engineering.
How do you feel like self-producing the album impacted or changed it, or like the sound of the band as opposed to the Grey?
Again, it's got a sound which at the time I probably wouldn't have liked, and now when I listen to it, it sort of fits the music. Sometimes it's by praxis, though, isn't it? Like my brain tells me now that the thing I should think is that the sound of the record fits the music. That's what my brain tells me I should think. Whether it's really true or not, and I'm imagining it, it's a different thing. But at the time, I'm pretty sure me and Danny wanted the record to sound more like a traditional record. Like when I say traditional record, I mean more like, a Chic record or a Duran Duran record or a David Bowie record. I don't mean in stylistically, I mean the sound of it. We probably would have wanted Sirens to sound like a very, very, like, studios in those days, your budget, decided the kind of studio it could go in, and the kind of studio it could go in decided what the fidelity sort of level was of your record. So you couldn't have got Sirens Are Back to sound like a Chic record or a David Bowie record or a Duran record, because you weren't in the kind of studio where those records were made. You needed to compare studios, or Montserrat, or you needed to be in Olympic, and we didn't have the budget to do that. So the record became its own thing. And again, Southern's kind of got it's a weird place to make records. It's a difficult place to work in, Southern was, like any studio, just in a physical sense, where the drum room is in, the drums and the guitars are being recorded in the house, and to get the control room, you have to go out of the back door of the kitchen and walk through the garden, and then into the garage to go in there. Of course, it's not like a real studio where Duran Duran were making records.
Well,
so
now that you got me on the ground, though, how do you communicate with the engineer? Say, like, so if you're really walking to the control room, like, I guess, are you communicating through like headphones and mics with Mel and the engineer? Okay.
Talkback, but what would happen is, you'd be talking on the talkback, and when you kind of roughly thought like, yeah, I think that tape's good, you'd take the headphones off, throw them on the floor, and go, "I'll come in and listen," and then you'd open the door and run down through the garden and through to the room, you know, past a great huge, I can't remember who made that, who made the fucking plate reverb that was in the little corridor. But you know, that's how it would all work. And so Sirens was made like that. And then I think what happened was when we went to make Sentinel on a different label again, we said we want to make it at Southern with Mel. I guess for no other reason that like we knew what we were going to get.
Well, that's what you talk about the same thing with. I mean, I want to bring up Karen in a minute, but you talk about familiarity being kind of essential to lack of knowledge. Like more of the friend in the environment being comfortable and having this sort of synergy as opposed to forcing it. Like when you had to replace members over the years, the two that you did, that you wouldn't. It wasn't, so to speak, like we need to find someone who's a musician that can do this. It was like we need to find a friend that we could like teach to do this because like they'll understand our ideas and what we're doing. The same sort of thing with Mel, that sort of familiarity. Is that? Do you think that's why you were doing that?
Yeah, I don't think it was like it was. You know, most people would go, "Oh, we didn't want to step outside a comfort zone." We didn't have a comfort zone. Didn't know what one was. We just sort of thought we liked Southern, and loads of records that we like have been done at Southern. No one moans about Southern, so it must be a good studio. So why don't we keep going there? And plus, it was only about fucking 3 miles from our house.
Well, what if I ask the question the other way then? If there is a uniqueness, obviously, because we talked about the way that Southern's even structured off the air in a little bit more detail, and the uniqueness that's provided in the sound from the soundscape of that studio. So that kind of factored in your mind as well, how you were able to utilize that environment.
Yeah, I don't think we consciously went the sound of Southern fits our band's sort of oral aesthetic or whatever like that. I don't think we thought that because I think seriously think in our mind, if someone said to right, here's the budget, you can pretty much record wherever you want on planet Earth. We would have chosen to have gone to Connie Plank's studio in Germany, in Cologne,
Okay.
where where things like Vienna by Ultravox was recorded, and also Systems of Romance by
But
Ultravox, and a few other records like that, because we would have thought that that's what we wanted to sound like.
all right, so I'm following you. You answered my question just right there. I was going to say,
It went
what is the reason? What was the reason that you wanted to do so? But that's why you wanted to sound that way.
I don't think it was someone said you don't have enough of a budget to go to a real studio, so Southern's the best bet. And I don't think it was a case of what's the budget. Well, there is 20 studios around London we could choose, but let's go to Southern because we like the way it sounds. I don't think it was any of that. I think it was just like, we're going to make a record. Oh, well, what day is Southern available?
No, no. With
Stupid as that, seriously.
So let's say 1984, right? Paul leaves, Karen enters, and Paul was on. You released Sirens Are Back on Corpus Christi. Where are things standing with the band? At this point, just overall.
Well, what happened was, he's not long after Grey, Paul decided he wanted to leave. In fact, it would have been around the time when the single came out. Paul decided he wanted to leave. We already knew we were making the album on Corpus Christi before Grey even came out. And in fact, Grey didn't come out until about April 84. And we already started recording Sirens by July. And Mel Jefferson came down to watch us rehearse so he could hear the songs, the material. He used to come down and watch us rehearse. Paul had said, I'm leaving the band. And he said, I'll stay for the recording of the album. So bearing in mind, Grey come out in April, and we're already in the studio recording it in July, I think.
Okay.
That was not a very long amount of time. So what happened was, this may sound fucking mental to most people, right? But this is an indication of what I mean about lack of knowledge being not like other bands, just to everyone can say that. But we really didn't. We had no interest in like putting an ad in a newspaper or nothing like that. So when Paul said he wanted to leave, not only did we say, well, who should we get? And then and we went, get Karen to be the bass player. What do you mean she's not played bass before in her life? Well, we'll just teach her the songs. In fact, what's probably more likely what's going to happen is instead of her learning all the old material, we'll give her a bass and we'll just start writing new songs. And so when the songs that she learns will be the ones that we're writing. So we're all learning them together. And not only did we do that, but when we were rehearsing for Sirens to record it with Paul would come in and we'd play the Sirens songs in the rehearsal. Paul would go home and then Karen would show up and we'd start rehearsing our new material with the same bass guitar. So when Paul left the band, you know, Karen joined the band and she just took over the job and the bass guitar.
Literally, yeah.
She inherited the bass guitar and the amp as well, you know. So there was none of this like, oh, you better take your gear home because you're going to, you know. Paul never took the gear with him. He just like, there's the bass, there's the amp, there's the job, you know. And we would have these rehearsals where the first 2 hours would be us with Paul playing the Sirens material. And then we'd be rehearsing with Karen, recording, writing and rehearsing our new stuff.
Were things relatively fluid with both?
Yeah. And when Sirens came out, and this is another weird thing, when Sirens came out, we'd already played gigs with Karen on bass. And doing those gigs, we didn't play a single song off Sirens Are Back. So by the time Sirens Are Back came out, we were already a gigging band with a new bass player playing not a single song off Sirens.
You're definitely not promoting your new album that way.
No other group would fucking do that. You know what I mean? And that's what I mean. To us, it wasn't weird. That just seemed like the logical thing to do. You know, if someone had said, you've just wasted an opportunity of having an album out, promoting it, we didn't even think of it. It was like, well, no, we've recorded that album.
Did the label ever put any pressure on you?
No. In fact, again, it's one of the advantages of being kind of on Crass and Corpus Christi was you could do what the fuck you liked. And they weren't spending any money on promotion. There was not a single advert in a paper. They never sent a record to a radio station, none of that shit. So, of course, the funniest thing is that when Sirens came out, it had only been out about maybe a month. We were already in the studio recording our new single with Karen when Sirens came, like the month it came out. We were in the studio recording a new record.
Well, what about, all right, so let's talk Sentinel then. With the release of Sentinel, Lack of Knowledge would garner a lot. You know, you garner a lot more attention with this one. And then they're the indie charts. And things begin to sort of evolve in a direction, as we say, with most of it, with less intention. Now, how did Lack of Knowledge respond to that? And how does this happen? Because you just made it really clear, you know, the way that Crass promoted things. It was there wasn't anything. It was underground. I mean, it's kind of an in with it sort of thing. You know who you know what's going on sort of thing. So how does Lack of Knowledge end up kind of, I mean, transcending is a bad word, but kind of end up falling into a bracket with a more commercial level amidst all of this?
You're dead right, because when I think of like when Sentinel came out, you know, we got a new lineup and the record came out, we got single of the week in Sounds. We started getting like live reviews, which was, you know, fucking hell, we get a live review. We bought the music papers every week.
Yeah.
Like, you know, Thursday comes along, you go out and buy all 4 of them and read them, you know what I mean? And to get a single of the week in any of the 4 music papers was a big deal if you're a young guy in a band.
Yeah.
You know, that, like, fucking hell. Not because you wanted to be famous. It was like, you know our shitty little band that rehearses in a fucking burnt out multi-story car?
Yeah, it's like playing with fucking dynamite and you blow your arm off on accident. It's a little surreal, yeah.
So we're in the fucking, you know, we've got a single of the week, like, and we wouldn't have thought that this record was any better than any of the others or anything like that. We you know, we didn't really have a subjective or an objective view on our own stuff, you know. It was just what it was. But what happened is I think probably during 1985, we got a great review for the album in the NME. Only small review, but it was a really positive review. We got a good review for the album, It Sounds. And then Sentinel came out and we got a couple of live reviews just before it. and the single came out. We got single of the week, and then we got a live. And suddenly we were playing gigs in these places like the Fulham Greyhound or the Clarendon Ballroom basement venue, which was like a kind of, the smaller of the two venues. But we would be the main band, and we wouldn't be playing with any other sort of, for want of a better phrase, anarcho band. So we wouldn't be playing with the Omega Tribe or the Apostles or anyone like that. It would be us and another band opening who will possibly sounded more like us. And people were showing up. We'd do a gig and there'd be like 100 people there.
Yeah, I was going to say, how did attendance? How did this affect the live performance?
Yeah, it seemed like suddenly we were almost like a legit group. Like a real group that people who weren't our friends came to see us.
Yeah,
where there were people at the gigs we didn't fucking know. That seemed mental. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you started to feel it too. You're like, all right.
And I wouldn't go as far as to saying that's when it, because we didn't ever feel like, oh, now we're contenders. We've got to start taking this seriously. We still didn't. We still acted the same way as we always did, And that's probably one of the reasons why the band split up, because I think deep down we didn't want to be like a real group, and there didn't seem to be nowhere to go. We were in this weird place where it's like, oh, we're in the music papers now, and we've got a record out, and it's been single of the week, but we don't actually, deep down inside of us individually or as a group, I don't think we really wanted to try to be a real group. I don't think we were capable. I don't think we had the ambition, or whatever you call it, the desire. It just didn't appeal to us.
Just the homogeneity of it beyond that sort of spontaneity of
and I don't think it was an affectation either. I mean, because genuinely, you can ask anyone who knows me, and they go, what does that fucking idiot listen to all day? And when he's thinking about making records, what's the sort of stuff that inspires him? And I can tell you right now, nothing makes me happier and gives me more, I get excited when I pull out the Pseudo Existers EP.
Yeah.
They're the kind of records that I don't get me wrong, I love to listen to, very sophisticated, Weather Report or a fucking, a tasty sounding Stevie.
I spend a lot of time with Baroque music as well. I understand.
Yeah, I love all that. But there's something that excites me about pulling out something like the Pseudo Existers record. I was recorded in a little fucking front room studio. The sleeves are all screen printed. And that's what really makes me happy in my relationship with making music. And I think Lack of Knowledge was always like that. We were always like it, I mean, Philip now, Philip's an artist now, and he's gone into that world where you just do your own, you're doing your own thing. You're not doing it for fame or money or anything like that, Danny had no interest in being a singer of a pop group or nothing. Otherwise, he would have done it, And I'm now in a sort of world where I have my own recording studio, and all the gear I've got down there is all archaic 70s and 80s gear rescued from dumpsters.
Where are you at now? I know I read something about Exit Stencil in like basement of Dial House. Is that where you're still at?
Oh no, when I moved into Dial House, and I built a studio in there's like a few outbuildings.
All right.
There, which get used for varieties of things, in artist resident, and in, what do they call it? An artist in residence, sometimes live in them for 6 months and things like that. So I took one of them and built a studio there. We recorded quite a lot of stuff. And eventually when I moved to New York, I just took the studio with me. And then so I have my studios over here now. And I've gone all the way back, I've gone all the way back on a personal level, outside of Lack of Knowledge, I've gone all the way back to, those are the things that excite me about music now, is doing it. I mean, I've always had a studio of some sort, but I've always had a sort of desire to sort of do records in that fashion, the way The Uninvited was done, or the way that, my sort of way of looking at music is that it should be you doing it and you making the records. I haven't sort of. It wasn't a point where I wandered off and went, oh yeah, now I'm in a Rolls Royce.
You're in a Rolls Royce now? Can I
No,
borrow
no,
it? I'm
no.
just kidding. No. I'm just kidding.
Like it's easy, people get sucked into that world of like when they join like in inverted commas a real group.
Yeah, I understand. I'm waiting on this to happen in my life, and nothing.
Yeah. Get sucked into the world of cocaine and nightclubs and all that. Something really fun. I always liked getting up in the morning and going to the guitar stores and the record stores. When I was into. Don't get me wrong. I like drinking.
Okay, but don't get me wrong.
To me, it never made me sort of think like, oh, do you know who I am? I should have my own solo deal and be like or I should, whatever I do in music now has to be done at a certain level of like,
you play to the environment, and so it sounds like you understand what's generated from what's coming.
I mean, one of the, and I said I wouldn't go off lack of knowledge off topic, but when I was in another band that was doing stuff at a way more mainstream, higher level with proper budgets, I was always advocating to the band's manager that we shouldn't be doing records on major labels. We should have our own label, and we should do everything ourselves, and make things much more like along those lines, especially in the kind of the way that the world is now and the way that the climate of the music industry is now. I thought it was a big mistake to be pursuing that world of trying to put records out with major labels, major distributors, when all of the data and the stats was pointing that going back to doing it all yourself was the right thing to do, even for big groups, And I've never gone away from that. My favourite records are still, those kind of quirky, independent, small label DIY things. I've never stopped liking that.
No, lack of knowledge. By contrast, because you've toured with other bands and other groups that you've been involved with over the years, so you do know, and even being involved with groups that were in kind of the seminal era of the '77 point, and that had later gone more of the commercial route and seen some of that. So the transcendence of this on a social and a professional level. Lack of knowledge stays more in the beginning of things as far as not having traveled too far outside of their bubble. Now, you get as far as Colchester, and we talked earlier. You didn't remember exactly when things came to an end, but what chain of events led to the eventual demise of lack of knowledge? Demise might sound like a bad word. I feel like you're all dying at the end. Like what led to the band kind of petering out?
Well, I think it's a combination of two or three things. One of them, we sort of run out of steam. In terms of like, if you look at it from the point of view of like the aesthetic side of it, like like I say to you, the best lack of knowledge times were the ones when we were putting on our own gigs and we were making the uninvited and we were playing in church halls and we were discovering these other bands and going to play in their local church hall, and that's when lack of knowledge was good. And the further we went away from that, we weren't disillusioned, but we sort of ran out of steam because we didn't really know how to operate in the more mainstream's the wrong word because it's implying that we were somehow in the fucking proper charts or had a real record deal. But to us, playing a fucking gig in a rock club and being in the music papers was mainstream. That's like what real groups did. And the more we got like that, the less we knew what we were supposed to be doing. We didn't know how to be a group like that. So to be in that world, it was like we were just like wandering around going, what? So there was that. There was also the thing of like, I think we'd probably reached a point where we had been going for so long and we hadn't made enough records. I mean, even if you take it from the point of the very day that Danny, Chiefy, me and Paul got in the studio for the first time after Chiefy could actually play a cohesive song on the drums from start to finish. Call it 1980. And when we split out the middle of 1986, 6 years. I mean, this is an era when groups are making an album every year, and we've made one. So I think that there was a point where we just hadn't made enough records. At the point where we split up, we should have already made 4 albums, 5 albums, and 7 or 8, 9, 10 singles in that time. And we hadn't. Everything always seemed to take fucking forever. There was loads and loads of gaps. And then now we're getting in the music papers and stuff like that. We don't have an agent. We don't have a manager. We don't have a proper vehicle to drive around in. We don't even rehearse in a rehearsal.
You got to start making all these business decisions, so to speak.
Yeah, it wasn't even like a real business decision. It was like they were just a phone call. But it was like it was the wrong world for us to be in. We really belonged in a world of church halls and fly posting bus stops with lecture set photocopied bits of paper. And that's kind of really rare. I mean, I'll tell you a funny thing. I only found this, well, I found this out. I only remembered it the other day, right? When we made Sentinel, we actually signed a contract with an Italian label to record a 6-track mini album.
So what happens?
We must, what basically happened, we signed the contract with them, and we probably had, not like we didn't have the enthusiasm, but we didn't even have any heart left as a band to be able to even release that. We recorded a couple of the songs, I think, like roughly around the time of recording Sentinel, but we didn't even have the steam left in us to go, well, all right, why don't we just put this record out and then split up, or put this record out, promote it, see what happens, and then split up. We didn't even have the gumption, the steam, or the enthusiasm to do that. So we sort of just petered out, like, you know what I mean? It was like, yeah, we just kind of fizzled out, you know, in the most lamest way that you possibly could ever imagine.
You're being hard on yourself there. Everyone, I mean, you know, I get it.
Like that, because we weren't ambitious people. It wasn't anyone in the band who said, now come on guys, you know, let's do this record with this Italian label, let's promote it, let's see what happens, let's give it one last shot, you know. And all
were there any
no
like contractual obligations that inhibited that made it an issue if you didn't complete it?
No, not at all. No, not at all. I think we just contacted the Italian label and said, and they just went, all right, yeah. It wasn't like they gave us a fucking advance or anything. I think, you know, but the only reason I remembered it was I found the contract. I was going through a box of stuff the other day. It all came back to me, and it was like, what are we going to do about it? Fuck it, this is good.
What about like 20 years later though, in the early aughts, right? You would record written material you would record material that had been written in the 80s, and this was released on a label called Grand Theft Auto, and then later there was a release called White Science, which came out on Alternative Records, which kind of had this like really brief stint. I think you're like one of 3 releases, like Los Chorices, the other one, and then I think there's one more I forget the name of. And
Cherries, That and Knowledge, and can't remember. The Alternative.
It may be, but I can't remember off my head. I'd be shooting at the stars.
Well, what basically happened was, I don't know. One day I got was emails even going back then? Yeah, probably was.
Yeah, it would have been like 2003.
No, this was way before.
Oh,
this was like
shit,
98
really?
or 99. Yeah, it's 98 or 99. Brian from Grand Audio got in touch with me. Do you have any unreleased material? Would you like to put it out? And of course, like everybody else, you know, you're flattered. And you think to yourself, really? What, us? Because like I say, you probably couldn't have found anyone on planet Earth other than the 200 people that ever saw us that would know Lack of Knowledge was. So I just thought it was weird. So I was working in studios a lot at that point. You know, I was making 3-4 records a year and, you know, working on all kinds of projects and historical things. So it kind of fitted in. So set about doing that. We had a lot of unreleased recordings. Like I say, you know, the unreleased singles that we did and unreleased tracks that never made it onto things. So I thought, let's compile something sort of weird and interesting. So did that.
Well, who did you get together when you all reorganized? What lineup? Who's involved in this?
All of us. All 6 of us.
Shit. Okay, all 6 of you. All right.
This is again an illustration.
Did Paul and Karen swap out with the bass the same way?
Oh, I'm not lying when I tell you we did 2 gigs.
I know you. I read that you did one in like New York or something, didn't you?
No, we did one with the Subhumans at the 100 Club in London. Okay. We played with the Subhumans back years ago. So we did a gig with the Subhumans at the 100 Club, and the way we decided to do the gig was all six of us would play. So we'd start off with the first lineup, the Tony, Danny, Paul, and Chiefy lineup. We'd play 3 or 4 songs. Chiefy would go off. Philip would then jump on the drums, and we'd play the songs from Sirens and Grey, a couple of them. And then Paul would walk off and give the bass to Karen, and then we'd play the Sentinel stuff. So that was the set. Actually worked in chronological
order. That's fantastic. That's really good. You all really get along that well still? So there's never been any bad energy in the band.
No, not at all. No. We're all still, when we get together, it's, it's the same. And we still all talk to each other. Like, in fact, as we were talking, Danny just emailed.
Oh, see, you all are very cordial. I mean, most bands are like, well, in the end, we all went to war. So.
And again, like, where were we? We were talking about.
You're talking about the performances when you had reunited. We were at the 100 Club with the Subhumans.
Right. So yeah, and then that Grand Theft Audio record came out, and what we also had was we had a lot of tracks that had never been recorded. So we decided go to Southern, record them with whatever lineup played the song originally. So we recorded about 9 or 10 songs. All of us were there. All 6 of us.
Are you with Mel again too?
No, we used Harvard
this
time. Harvard was really great. But not only the same studio, recorded the songs on the same bass and the same guitar that the original band, because we still have all the original gear. Yeah. I still have the original guitar, my original amp, and everything. So we used all the same original gear, and the results were great. The playing was great. I didn't like the mixes. And then a couple of years later, I guess because of that, this guy got in touch with from the label, what was it?
Yeah, you're correct.
San Francisco or somewhere like that. So we just did the same thing. We said, right, we've got 4 more songs left that we never ever demoed. And again, they were from different lineups. So we went and did them. In fact, one of the songs on that EP was going to be on on Grey, the one with Paul singing, called He Came From the Glory. That was originally going to be on Grey. And at the last minute, we kind of left it off, and we never bothered to record it. So we recorded that one. And so eventually, all of the songs were recorded and released in one form or another. I was never happy with the way a lot of it sounded. A little bit too modern sounding for my taste.
Yeah, but it's still, I know, because a lot, like what you're saying, because a lot of the kind of the digital conversion in studios at that time made things a bit clean. It was, I've worked on albums where you would go in, and I played in some noisier bands, and we would go in and record something, and they'd be like, "Are you sure that you want it to sound that way? It sounds like total shit." And we would be like, "Yeah, we don't want, like, it's you homogenize the sound of it." But I still feel like, like with White Science is a good album though. It is. It's still progressive. You could put it out right now and like people would think it was brand new. I mean, it's not. I don't even feel like it's not contemporary. It's not really of a time and place. It shows an advance in the band in a weird way. I mean, like if you didn't know anything about the band and you listened to it, you'd be like, "Oh shit, this is good." Some bands come back like 20 some years later and you're like, "Oh no." But that's still there. It still has a relevant tone to it.
I'll tell you right now, then you're going to be in for a bit of a surprise, because what I've been working on for the last year and a half, I've got all of the master tapes for Sirens. I've had them all digitized. I've had all our demos digitized. And I got all the multi-tracks back from all the stuff we recorded that we've ever recorded. And it just worked out that the lineup that made The Uninvited, there was 14 tracks recorded, roughly an album's worth of material. Then Sirens, which is the middle lineup, where Chief Philip joins. And then the Sentinel lineup, there's 11 songs, an album's worth of material. So I've compiled it into 3 albums. So there's a lineup for each album with Sirens in the middle. It's all finished now. It's all mastered, ready to be released. It possibly is going to be done through one little independent, who's putting out the reissue of The Grey. Derek's a nice guy. I told him what I wanted to do. So it's going to be 3 albums in a box with a big book explaining all of the history of Lack of Knowledge and photographs and stuff like that. But all of the stuff's been remixed much more in the style of what the original Lack of Knowledge sounded like. My problem with the White Science and the stuff I'm going for audio isn't that it doesn't sound any good. It's got a kind of a modern sheen on it, which doesn't suit Lack of Knowledge.
I'm following you. I understand exactly what you mean. Yeah.
Kind of sound of Lack of Knowledge, that's what we were saying at the beginning. It needs to have a much more of a grainier, darker, dystopian.
You need to go back from digital to film, is what you're telling me. You need to,
yeah. So, and because of course now, I've been a recording engineer for long enough to know what I'm doing. All the tapes got sent away. The ones in England got sent to a place over there to be digitized and baked, and then the ones that I had over here with me got sent down into Nashville to be digitized. So I brought them all together. And that's all been done now. It's all finished, ready to go. I'm working with Malcolm Garrett on the sleeves, and the design for the whole set is being done by Malcolm Garrett, who ironically did Rio by Duran.
All right, there we go. Now, with you've got something coming out like more immediately, isn't there? There's like a master release of Grey coming out, and you worked with Penny. You've collaborated with Penny on that, haven't you? You had to do some work with Penny to get that out.
Yeah, Penny wanted to. Penny had the idea of re-releasing all the 7 inches on Crass as 12 inches.
Okay.
And he wanted to do them first one and the last one. So Lack of Knowledge and Honey Bane were going to be the first two, but it hasn't kind of worked out. It's become a bit more random than that. But just before the COVID, me and Danny and Penn went to Abbey Road to master it. It all got done. I got test pressings, then the COVID happened.
Yeah.
So it all got delayed by fucking 2 years. But it's actually coming out on the 9th of December. In the meantime, in the about what are we now? It's just November, isn't it? So this time last year, I had an email from a guy in Germany who runs a label called No Plan Records.
Okay.
And he puts out all kinds of hardcore and punk early 80s, all from all over the world. Re-releases, he said, I want to re-release your Uninvited single. And I just thought it was the maddest thing I'd ever heard in my life.
Why?
Just because I couldn't believe it. I can't help but go, that record that was recorded in that front room in Edmonton, where I put all the records in the sleeves in my front room of my mum's.
Let me tell you what, Tony. The young punks, they just keep coming. And the mothers, they keep crying. I don't know what to tell you.
And you want to know what's even weirder, right? So it gets even more fucking mad, especially if you're me and Danny, who just can't stop laughing. So the guy, Dario from No Plan Records, yes, so he wants to put the Uninvited out as a re-released as a 7-inch.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, you're a lunatic. But if that's what you want to do, you do it. The same week, I get a fucking email from a guy in America saying, I want to re-release the Uninvited. So I have to phone him up and say, listen, it's unbelievable. Thank you very much. I said, there's something weird happened, like it's just appeared in a Batman movie or Game of Thrones. Because why do two labels from across the world suddenly want to, the same day almost, want to re-release the Uninvited? He just went, no, we just love that record. I said, well, you can't, because someone's already beat you to it by 2 days. And he went, blah, 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 and he got talking, and he said something about a cassette. And I went, what? And he went, well, no, we're a cassette label. I said, so the Uninvited's coming out on a German label based in Berlin as a 7-inch, and a cassette label based in America. I can't remember where he is. He might be even in Portland. He might be in Vermont.
If so,
it's a label, Floating Mill Records.
Floating Mill Records.
Mill Records, yeah. He's a really nice guy called Cullen. And the German label is this guy, Dario, who runs this label called No Plan Records. I'm pretty sure anyone listening to this will find them on Instagram and the internet. So that's coming out the week after the Grey single, which is coming out on One Little Independent as a 12-inch. So, yeah, 2 records in a month. lack of knowledge, 4 records in 6 years.
And you're going to be, by the time they're out, you're already writing a new one. You're like, fuck these records. We're moving on to the next. No, so are you, but in truth though, you think there's going to be, somebody's going to ask you to play. Are you going to play?
No, I've already been asked.
See, I knew it. So yeah, somebody, I should have said, let me rephrase that. Somebody already asked you to play. What are you going to do about it? Let's get
Well, I can tell you, you can imagine the rest of the guys' reactions when I tell them this. So the day that I decided to start up a Lack of Knowledge Instagram account, just because I got so much old Lack of Knowledge stuff, and I thought, well, the Grey's going to be coming out, I'll start posting some stuff. I posted the first couple of things, and the fucking same day I get a private message from someone going, I do a festival in Los Angeles, which you guys, yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can imagine when I tell the other guys back in England that, it's just hilarious. So then, didn't post nothing for a couple of years because I was waiting for the fucking Grey thing to be confirmed, the release date. Anyway, so I started posting stuff again on Instagram about, actually, no, there's one more. About 2 weeks after the Los Angeles, I get a private message from someone in Malaysia saying, we're massive fans of Lack of Knowledge. We're a band. Would you come and play a gig in Malaysia? We'll organise it and we'll open for you. So that was gig number 2. And then about a month ago, when I posted the thing saying, Grey's going to come out, I get another email from someone in Las Vegas saying, we do a festival every year. Would you come and play that? So 3 gig offers, none from England.
Well, if they're willing to pay the plane tickets, I mean, you can go out there. And...
to be perfectly honest,
be careful coming to America. You know how it is with us punks over here. We'll be like, look, we'll buy your plane ticket, maybe, and you can sleep on the floor and borrow my amp. And I don't know what kind of amp that'll be.
It's funny because obviously I don't know. I'm not sure if anybody left in the band would even, counter the idea of doing a Lack of Knowledge gig these days. 2, there'd probably only be one lineup that could do it, or that would want to do it. One version of the 3 family, the Lack of Knowledge family. I think there's only. I'm pretty well. Obviously, Paul's not there. But I don't think anyone would want to do it, to be honest. I think that putting the stuff out's one thing. Because like I say, between Grey, The Uninvited being re-released on the 7-inch cassette, and then the 3 albums that I've got ready to come out, which includes Sirens as the middle album, that's everything that Lack of Knowledge ever recorded. And pretty much every song we ever wrote as well, there's like 50-something songs altogether. Which is kind of a good way to kind of nicely, it's nice and rounded like that. I don't think that going out and doing gigs would help it in any way at all. And because Lack of Knowledge wasn't a band where I go, yeah, we need to help promote these records. No, that's not what we were like. B, we've been asked by somebody to do a gig in Los Angeles. Oh, let's go and do it because it would make us feel good, or it would boost our egos or whatever. That's not really what we were about, not who we are. I don't think we'd think it would increase our profile. I can't think of a single reason why anyone in the band would want to do it. And no matter how much money they offered or how far up the bill we were or any of that stuff, none of it would matter. I don't think anyone in the band would go, everyone in the band would probably go, well, what's the point? That's really what most people would think. Now, if someone said, we should do an anniversary gig of a gig that we did 40 years ago in a church hall around the corner from our house.
This is the pitch right here. Go ahead. I'm ready.
That might be the gig that we would do.
All right. So we've got to break some people out. All right. I know.
No, but I don't think I could be wrong. I could put it to the others and say, look, there's this offer. And they might go, well, it sounds great, doesn't it? I've never been there before. And I'd say, yeah, but we've got to rehearse properly. stuff like. Then I'd start taking it all seriously, and I mean, we would. I mean, we would if we said yes. The minute that everyone agreed to do it, it would become really serious, and we would be, agonizing over what songs to play at the
Well,
gig, and
that's important though, because especially if you're playing more of a nostalgic lineup or as a reunion band, I think because you have people that are kind of vested into a particular archetype of that. So I think that being able to get together and give your audience, I mean, I know that's like a not selling point, but like what they're looking for, but be able to really show that you've taken the time to reorganize the show and put on something, and that it really
oh
is
yeah,
as
there's no
important
way.
to you as before. It doesn't make it a sham. You know what I mean?
I mean, there's no way we would turn up and do, even if we were to do it, we wouldn't turn up, walk on stage in our fucking everyday clothes or shorts, God forbid, things like that, and trainers. We'd take it really seriously, and we'd be thinking like, how could we present ourselves as as still sort of saying the same thing as what we said 40 years ago, but in a contemporary way, without it looking like a load of old people who are trying to pretend they're still teenagers, or looking like a load of people who don't fucking actually care. We'd be really trying to look for the where's our little thing that we can find that works in all of those ways. You know what I mean? Like we'd want to look good, we want to sound good, but we'd also want to not present ourselves as being something we're not. Old people playing, trying to look like we did 40 years ago. That right either. So that's why I don't think we'd ever do it, because there'd be too much. There'd be too much to consider. Not saying it would be completely out of the question, but it's unlikely. It's unlikely. I've got to be honest, personally, I'm just absolutely, sort of not excited, is not the right word, but like flattered and sort of honored really that these records are going to come out. Not because they're great records, but because the interest in the band is so, you know, as warranted people wanting to get in touch and say, we'd really love to put out this old record you made all these years ago, and there's people who want to hear it and people who want to own it. That's so exciting for me, and sort of flattering and humbling. You know what I mean? It's
Oh yeah.
that's
And
the
now we're sitting here.
that's
We've
the
got the entire thing. We've got the story to go along with it now, which is definitely much, much more in depth to the abridged version that has been in paper on print or in print so far.
there's probably lots of other little nooks and crannies we could go in, but you know, um, I the funny thing about having to talk about lack of knowledge, and it is a group that was going for 6 years, 35 years ago, whatever, is that there's only so much you can say because there's only so much that happens. So any particular thing, if someone talks to me about a specific thing like Southern Studios, there is a finite amount of information. It's not like you go, oh, I'm going to tell it this time. It's going to be completely different to last time because I missed out all this other stuff. Well, it's not really like that. It's like all the things about playing Churchill's, where we used to rehearse, how we met Crass, how we got to do a single on Crass. It's the same story. It has, every time I tell the story, it's the basic truth. There's no embellishments. It's not like each time I tell it, it's slightly different, or each time I tell it, there's a new twist to it that I've
You
forgotten
you
from
can. I
last
mean,
time.
we can do a little Orson Welles wonder here if you want. We can do.
No, I mean, I could bring in other stuff into it, like, we were being Dial House and we'd be tiptoeing around whispering, because we were so in awe of being there and stuff. And, just stupid things like, well, just being allowed to have a slice of their homemade bread. It was just, oh God, oh my God, I'm so fucking nervous and it's so exciting. Yeah, it's all things like that that don't, that are the things that are unspoken
But
things.
those are your experiences in a way. I think
Yeah,
it's hard to it's hard to relay those experiences to people. But we get it because like there's so many people who would I think have, especially with like the Crass books that have come out and everything over the years and the information that's there. I think that like what you're saying, a lot of people could be like like they can understand that. You know what I mean?
and I've been, I won't say I've been a lucky boy, but I was lucky because Small Wonder was my local record shop. Crass gave him a demo tape. He played it in the shop. Me and Paul started to like it. We met Penn and G before the record even come out, and stayed friends with him all the time. And you know, I've been lucky. I've made loads of records with Penn. You know, I've made records with Eve Libertine, Bron. I've made records with Steve Ignorant. You know, I've done stuff with G, lots of stuff with G. You know, lived at Dial House, had a studio there and all that. So, you know, I've had quite a decent involvement with all them, you know, with members of Crass.
And that's just a component of it. I mean, you know, so if there's out there, I know you've done other interviews, and you did one with what is it called, Pet City, because you're very much into animal rights, and what was that? What is the interview there? Because that's a good interview for people to source as well. It's
I don't even know if it's still up.
It's out there. I've listened to it.
Is it not a Wayback Machine?
It's
at this point, you know.
It's no, you can get it. It's not difficult to listen to. It still streams relevant, but it gives you an idea, because I know you've done so many other things that we're not able to cover here today. Now we are short on time with the formal interview, so I'll probably talk to you a little more off the air.
Good. That's good. That's a good thing.
But I do know that you've covered a vast array of information. So if you're interested in learning more about Tony Barber, you definitely, all you got to do is Google his name. He's out there, and I know you're going to be modest about that. But I've done a little research. I know there's some other things. So off the air, I'm going to ask you about what it was like when you played Pink Floyd. And I'm just kidding. No, but I do appreciate you taking the time to come here and speak with me on Life During Wartime tonight. So definitely look forward to the new Lack of Knowledge releases, and to that big local reunion show that's going to happen as soon as somebody pitches the idea, right? So.
Be in the pub.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the show tonight. You're listening to Life During Wartime on KBOO 90.7 FM Portland, and we'll be back with you shortly.